Warning. Warning. If you are an atheist, the following video might offend your blind faith commitment. By blind faith, atheists operate from an impersonal absolute that they believe provides intelligibility to the reality around them. The problem is they violate their own standard for belief by operating in blind faith from an impersonal absolute they cannot provide, that they want granted to them. If you are an atheist who's suffering fear and anxiety or existential crisis, after viewing this video, please consult the Bible for biblical counseling.
Because right now, my capacity to reason is only in virtue of God as the starting point. And if somebody says, well, I reason that there aren't any good reasons for God, then what you're saying is that your capacity to reason doesn't have to reference God as the origin point for reason and anything else. And if you can have reason without referencing God as the origin point, then God doesn't exist. Because in a world where God exists, God's the origin point for all facts.
Sure. I'll be back, fellas.
Atheists can no longer hide behind that they lack belief.
Right. And what I'm seeing now is on some atheists, what they're doing is now when it comes to the question of how the universe began, something created or nothing created everything. Now they're trying to redefine what nothing is. They're giving nothing, which is the absence of anything. They're trying to give it some type of quantity. Of course, here. Neil deGrasse Tyson was asked that. What do you think is the foundation of everything? And he said forces, which is probably similar to like string theory. So you see, they have their God, but their God is blind, deaf, and dumb, and without a persona. It's that simple. But they're trying to define. They're trying to give nothing. Now they're trying to give it properties.
Yeah, well, they're deliberately doing that. It's they're referring to nothing as an ocean of fluctuating quantum energy where virtual particles can pop into and out of existence. But that's not nothing.
Right.
All they've simply done is they've taken something and labeled it as no thing. You see?
Yeah, that's what I've noticed is they can't. There's kind of a shift in their argumentation.
Not only are they disingenuous and slippery, they're devious and they lie and they're deceptive. The bottom line is their position is not coherent, not at all. So the agnostic position is actually incoherent. It's people who haven't carefully analyzed the theological perspective or spectrum. They're treating God as though God were just some common other object, like a jar of jelly beans or gold on Mars. But the jar of jelly beans, whether there's even or odd jelly beans or gold on Mars, neither of those would be the origin point for all facts. But God either is or is not the origin point for all facts. So there's going to be some absolute that is the origin point for all facts. It'll either be personal or impersonal. If it's personal, that's what we call God. And so their position is not coherent, but they're not aware of its incoherency because they haven't been ruthlessly introspective to analyze it.
Another thing that I'm seeing is the argument tends to be that now they try and redefine terms as they're using them. And like a lot of them,
they're slippery.
Right. The conversation turns from being a discussion about the point of origin or God into an argument over definition of terms.
Look, they reason, listen, even the smartest of the atheists, they reason like children. In other words, as long as they can spew out anything to produce a stalemate, they consider that victory. This is what they do. Why do you think so many of my interlocutors who are atheists will not answer my questions? Because if they do, then they get exposed.
Exposes their worldview.
They get exposed. I ask, listen, I'm not trying to brag. I ask my questions with surgical precision. Because I know that if they honestly answer the question, then they will have to come to the conclusion that their model of reality, their worldview is incoherent. And they violate their own principle. I understand philosophically how the atheist is thinking foundationally, and the atheists themselves do not understand it.
What are they thinking?
What are they thinking? Well, they're reasoning from some absolute that's usually held at an unconscious level, and from that they spew forth their dependency statements. But their statements don't ultimately depend upon anything. So there can't be any coherence or intelligibility for assertions coming out of the mouths of atheists. And if they claim that they do, they're going to have to violate their principled criterion as an atheist. It's really very simple. If somebody says, I don't believe in God, from a philosophical point of view, they're saying, I don't believe that whatever is absolute is personal. Say, okay, fine. Then what's the absolute that you are operating from? And if the atheist says, I don't know, well, then it's game over. Or if they say, well, there doesn't need to be an absolute, say, well, then either probably 99 times out of 100 when they say that, they're just ignorant of the error that they've committed. It's because if you say you don't need an absolute, then what they're saying is you don't need a basis to make assertions. You don't need a basis for the intelligibility of any statement. How foolish is that? And if they're going to reject the personal absolute, then they're going to be operating from an impersonal absolute. So when we take their criterion of belief that they say has to be fulfilled for the personal absolute, God, and we apply that to their impersonal absolute, it turns out they don't have grounds for the impersonal absolute. Therefore, they have no basis to say that there are no good reasons or no evidence for God. Ground and provide for the intelligibility of any statements of dependency. So if you say the sky is blue, that's a statement of dependency. If you say the dog is wagging its tail, that's a statement of dependency. Everything is dependent and derivative, unless we're speaking of that which is absolute. And God, philosophically speaking, will be the personal absolute. So if somebody says, I lack belief in the personal absolute, they're not operating from a vacuum. So then they're going to, by default, be believing in an impersonal absolute. So what justifies that? And when the atheist tells you his justification for belief in an impersonal absolute, it turns out they violate their criterion of belief.
Now that you see that atheism is incoherent, if you are an atheist who's suffering fear and anxiety or existential crisis, after viewing this video please consult the Bible for biblical counseling. There are also many Christian counselors that would be happy to help you out of the atheist illusion. God bless. Hope your day is good.